President Trump, responding to a reporter's question, said he had asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, this revelation is pretty significant. What impact might it have on the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran and the balance of power in the Middle East? Here to discuss this, Gregg Roman, the executive director of the Middle East Forum, a think tank which focuses on protecting American interests and values in the Middle East. He previously served as the political advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel and worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Gregg, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let me just ask you, the acknowledgement that the president asked Benjamin Netanyahu not to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, what does that say?
Well, I think that he's still trying to give the Iranians time to have a deal. But you need to be able to look at the exact words that he said between his acknowledgement. He asked Bibi to delay any strike and what he said at the end. He gives 6 conditions. 1 is full inspections. 2 is the ability to destroy Iranian nuclear infrastructure. 3 is getting rid of enrichment capabilities. 4, he does not trust the Iranians, but he has to verify all the instances. 5, anything could change within a day with 1 phone call. And 6, that he's not asking or ordering the Prime Minister of Israel to not strike Iran. He's engaging in honest dialogue with him. So with these 6 things, maybe there's a delay here, but I still have the opinion, as I wrote in a few pieces over the last few weeks, that Iran is not going to stop their march towards a nuclear weapon. And unfortunately, I think that in the end, they're going to try to hoodwink the president, but the president in and of itself will not allow the Iranians to dupe him into signing a deal which will not be under those conditions.
You know, the president has repeatedly laid out that criteria that you put forth. My sense is, in my conversations with those in Israel, that they're getting a little antsy, that they realize the window that was open in part because of their actions they took earlier in the year against Iran, weakening their air defense systems. That window's there for now, but it won't be there for long until they're able to either move forward with their nuclear plan or protect it. Is that an accurate read?
It's accurate, and there's also some disturbing news coming out of a report from Middle East Forum fellow Ben Weinthal that was just published about an hour ago before this broadcast began, which is that Austrian intelligence and its Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the equivalent of the American FBI, released a report on Monday evening to the Austrian parliament, quoting that the Iranian intelligence forces, in order to assert and enforce its regional political power ambitions, are striving for comprehensive rearmament. This is the key part, with nuclear weapons to make the regime immune to attack and to expand and consolidate its dominance in the Middle East and beyond. This is not American intelligence saying. This is a European intelligence agency, which backs other reports which came out from the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency last week, which said, quote, Iran is almost certainly not producing nuclear weapons, but Iran has undertaken activities in recent years that better position them to produce them. These actions reduce the time required to produce a weapon to 1 week. So if this is what the Austrians are saying, if this is what the DIA is saying, you can imagine the superior capabilities of Israeli intelligence and what they're seeing, which is probably a transparent effort within Iranian nuclear circles to go forward and develop the bomb.
And so that's why we see Israel wanting to move now rather than later.
Right, and I think that the visit by Mossad head David Barnea and also Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer to Washington, D.C. this week is to convey Israeli intelligence findings and the necessity to explain to American officials that the window is closing. And just like the Israelis acted in 1981 on the Iraqi nuclear project and in 2007 against the Syrian nuclear project without U.S. permission, without U.S. buy-in, we may be getting to the point right now that they may act to defend their interests and go after the Iranian program. The U.S. was angry at those 2 points in 81 and in 2007 with Israeli actions, but a few years later, they ended up thanking the Israelis for taking out the attack and doing it unilaterally.
Well, and I mean, this is an existential threat, as we've been hearing repeatedly for Israel. It absolutely is. All right, Gregg Roman, I want to move on to another topic. I want to play a clip, same press conference today, where the president made a comment about his recent trip to the Middle East. Clip number 3, please.
I went to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, and we brought back $5.1 trillion. I picked up $5.1 trillion, and by the way, got a beautiful, big, magnificent, free airplane for the United States Air Force, okay? Very proud of that, too.
You know, that trip earlier this month was both extraordinary and concerning for many who track terrorism and the Middle East. For example, I want to focus on Qatar. They're engaged in really kind of an influence funding operation here in the United States, very similar to that we see coming out of China, giving money to education institutions, think tanks, the media, and former policymakers, just to name a few. Is there legitimate reason to be concerned about what Qatar's doing?
There is, 100%. It goes beyond politics and their attempt to influence the White House. If you look at every aspect of American life, things that we hold near and dear, on Main Street, if you will, whether it's our K through 12 public schools, our private education, higher education, businesses, investment funds, sports teams, our best scientists, engineers, even school boards and state legislatures. The Qataris are trying to manipulate and buy America wholesale by putting money into efforts with this $1.2 trillion investment that they made. But it's different from the Saudis and from the Emiratis. The Saudis and the Emiratis seek partnership with the United States. Qatar seeks financial dominance over the United States in order to advance its pernicious agenda. And I think that it really has to be clear that along with this amount of money they're trying to put into the U.S. economy, which is potentially beneficial for the United States, it comes with strings attached. But the Qataris need to realize that there are U.S. mechanisms, both in government and also in the private sector, which will hold them accountable. So if they want to deploy their capital in the United States, the U.S.'s response should be, that's fine, but you're going to play by our rules, not by your agenda.
Maybe this is simplistic, Greg, but as I look at this, I think back 25, 30 years ago when there was debate over China getting most favored nation status. It's very similar. We're talking about business. We're talking about doing economic transactions with these countries that somehow we're going to change them. It didn't work with China. And I would say that Qatar, in their connection with terrorism, I mean, they're almost like the mob. They create a problem and then they say we're going to solve it if you give us enough money. I mean, they're a big backer of Hamas. In fact, some of Hamas's leadership is hiding out in Qatar. Is that a correct read?
It's not just Hamas. They were hosting Khalid Sheikh Mohammed before 9/11 when he was planning the attacks against the Twin Towers in the Pentagon. They've bribed Hezbollah. They acted as the main conduit for foreign remittances to Iran during the maximum pressure campaign of President Trump from 2018, even until today. They host the Chinese currency exchange for all Middle East oil, allowing Iranian energy to find an exit ramp to avoid U.S. sanctions. They're not just the arsonist and the firefighter. They're also the 6 p.m. news who shows all their spectacles for the world to watch. And they have to be held to account. But the thing that's different with them versus China is that if we want to be able to have a strong U.S. response to their pernicious activity, then I think it will require a misstep by them. And I think President Trump is aware of this. I think he sees the Capitol as something that could be to the U.S.'s net advantage. But I also think that as he did in 2017 when he called them a state sponsor of terror on the Rose Garden on the White House lawn, we might be getting to that point soon in terms of if they do one misstep, if they have one action which is against American national security interests, President Trump will come down with a hammer and allow that to be the anvil as well.
Well, let me just ask you, going back to his statement in the Rose Garden, what's changed since then?
Well, I think that the Qataris realized that their activities up through 2017 were not just earning the ire of the United States, but also of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf countries, which led to the GCC blockade of Qatar in 2017 through about the beginning of 2020. Now, they've been trying to play it quick and fast. They've been moving away from some of their overt sponsorship of extreme organizations, and they've tried to do it now behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, the raison d'etre is still the same. They're still acting as a malign force against the United States in the region. And I think with the cards that they're trying to deal in terms of balancing their interests with American interests, there were some things that they did to capitulate to U.S. demands, but on the long run, they're just waiting until another president comes in, and they're going to play lip service to President Trump, all at the same time when their Arab news outlets are actually lambasting the United States, are criticizing the presidency, and are making extremely anti-American and anti-Semitic statements on a daily basis. This just has to be brought to the president's attention, and I think at the point that it does, the switch will flip.
Now, you mentioned this in passing as an illustration that they cover the 6 o'clock news. They actually are the primary funder behind Al Jazeera, are they not?
The owner, not just the funder. I mean, Al Jazeera is Qatari state television, and they've been labeled as a foreign agent by the Department of Justice, yet failed to register, not listening to the DOJ's edicts. This is what I'm saying. There's too many irons in the fire that they have, and there's too many opportunities for them to make a mistake. And I'm just waiting for the day that all of the research we've been doing on them, all of the cataloging of their influence activities, their legal influence activities, will come to a boil. And at that point, I think the president will realize that the straw that broke the camel's back was their attempt to buy America without America getting anything in return.
So where does the one big beautiful jet come in?
Well, I think that was an offer by the Qatari Ministry of Defense to give a plane to the U.S. Air Force. And at the end of the day, I think when congressional appropriators look at it, it'll actually cost more money to take the plane apart and to rebuild it than it will to wait until 2027 when those 2 Boeing Air Force Ones are supposed to be ready. It was more of just a grand gesture, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a hollow attempt to try to buy U.S. favor. And when they actually see the issues with the plane and how much it's going to cost the taxpayer, President Trump will probably walk that back.
What about, we just got about 2 minutes left. Qatar, as you pointed out, in a class by themselves. Saudi Arabia not too far behind. Now, UAE is much different. I've been there. I've met with the Crown Prince there. I think they're a little more open to religious freedom there. Saudi Arabia doesn't have the first church there. Qatar, very similar. So there's human rights are 2 really significant issues when you look at Qatar and the Saudi Arabia.
Right, and I think Saudi Arabia, though, is moving in the right direction, wherein Qatar has just arrested someone who was trying to make a march for religious freedom to be able to practice Christianity, and there was another instance of someone practicing Judaism who were put in jail because of the Qataris' actions. The Saudis, albeit they're taking baby steps, are trying to move in the direction of creating zones in the country where there can be religious freedom, where individuals can consume libation, where you can have a little bit more of equality between men and women there. We have to recognize at the end of the day, though, the king who comes from that long, long history of Fadl al-Saud, going all the way back to the 30s and 40s, is still in control. And right now, Mohammed bin Salman can only do what his family will allow him to do. But I think at the point that MBS becomes king, we'll see more of a gingerly pace in the way in which reform takes place in Saudi Arabia. But they are moving in the right direction. It's just a little bit slower than the rest of the region.
Gregg Roman, great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll be talking again real soon.
Thanks, Tony. It was good to see you again.